She fired me in front of the entire office, my own wife. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just walked away, and that's when everything changed. So, picture this, there I was, standing awkwardly in my wife's office. Her name's Rachel, and she wasn't just any employee, she was the top dog in her department, the one calling the shots. Me. I was just another name buried somewhere down the corporate ladder, a basic account rep trying to make it through the workday. When she first took the reins of the division, I was a bit uneasy, but I figured it'd be okay. There were layers upon layers of management between us. I thought that distance would keep things professional, that it would shield us both. Maybe I was just being naive. Then came the moment that changed everything. Your numbers have plummeted, Mr. Waxman, she said coldly, not even flinching. You ranked dead last in your division this year. We didn't really have much of a choice. I didn't even get a moment to respond before she added, Logan's waiting outside to walk you to your desk. He'll stay while you gather your personal items. Logan, or just L, as people in the office casually called him, was one of the 2 security guys on staff. Reliable, quiet, the type that didn't ask questions. We all knew the drill. Once someone's name came up for termination, L was the one who ensured it stayed clean and orderly. It stung more than it should have. Not because I was being let go, well, not just that, but because of who was doing it. Because this wasn't some faceless HR rep. This was Rachel, my wife. The woman I had shared a bed with for nearly a decade. At work, we kept it strictly professional. She always addressed me as Mr. Waxman, and I called her Ms. Bennett, which was the name she kept for her career. She told me once it was to avoid confusion or favoritism. But the whole office knew we were married. Heck, I had a photo right on my desk of her shaking hands with the board chairman the day she got promoted. I was so proud of her then. And now I was being walked out of the building like some disgraced temp, by order of the same woman I thought I'd grow old with. 9 years, Rachel. 9 loyal years, I said, my voice shaking but not from fear. And this is how it ends? She didn't look up. I could feel her discomfort, but she didn't say anything right away. I still love you, I added, almost in disbelief that I was saying it in that moment. Even after this. You're smart, you're accomplished, but in this situation, you really messed up. Badly. I wasn't shouting, but I wasn't hiding my emotions either. And yeah, I am angry. Beyond angry. I'm absolutely livid. You handled this in the worst possible way. I paused, letting the silence stretch between us. In all the years I worked here, did I ever get a single negative review? Was there ever a warning, a meeting, a write-up? Nothing. Just this. You say my numbers were low, fine. But maybe you should have asked why instead of treating me like a stranger. I could see her trying to come up with something, anything, but she stayed quiet. I'm not gonna grovel, I told her, already turning away. I've got to get up early tomorrow and figure out how to rebuild whatever pieces of my life you just blew up. I hope you sleep well. I was already at the door when I heard her quietly say, I'll be up in a little while. She didn't mean it. Or maybe she did. Honestly, I don't know anymore. By the time she started screaming, I was already deep asleep. It jolted me upright. I guess she hadn't even realized until then that I'd moved all my things out. Truth is, I'd relocated to the largest guest bedroom a few nights ago. It had its own bathroom and gave me some space to breathe. I didn't plan on going back to our room anytime soon. Didn't take long before there was pounding on the door. For heaven's sake, David, grow up, she barked through the wood. You stink, you know that? And you're starting to pack on a gut. You might be fine living in this mess, but I'm not. This isn't who you are. I stayed quiet, just sitting on the edge of the guest bed, listening. There was a pause before her voice softened a little. I'm sorry, okay? I admit I could have handled everything way better, but like you said yourself, once a bell's rung, there's no unringing it. There was a long silence, and then she added, much more gently, Please, sweetheart. I miss who you used to be. I miss your warmth. I miss your arms around me at night, and I miss feeling close to you. It's been nearly a month. Why won't you come back? I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. I just lifted my hand and wiggled my fingers at her like I was showing off a new toy. I'm kind of involved now, I said calmly. These 5 fingers? They've been more loving, more loyal to me than anyone in this house lately. They don't criticize me, they don't make me feel like a failure, and not once have they questioned my worth. She didn't laugh. She didn't say anything. I sighed and stood up, speaking through the door. You spent years prioritizing your career. Our entire marriage revolved around what worked for you. And honestly, I'm finished chasing something that was never truly mine. I hope that corner office keeps you warm at night. I hope those promotions, the glowing reviews, and the stock options make up for never hearing little feet run down the hallway. I really hope your success fills that emptiness you're trying so hard to ignore, the one that comes from not having a real family or anyone close to lean on. There was silence. Heavy silence. Is this hard for you because you're finally realizing how much you hurt me? I asked, my voice steady. Or is it hard because you're watching people walk away now and you don't know how to stop it? I let that sink in for a bit before adding, you created something toxic when you made me the example. People saw it. They felt it. You didn't just hurt me, you poisoned the atmosphere for everyone. That's when I heard it, her crying. Full-on, uncontrollable sobs right outside the door. She couldn't hold it in. 20 full minutes went by before she could speak again. Her voice was shaky, barely a whisper when she finally said, Jen, open it. Please. Just tell me how bad it is. I didn't know what she handed Jen, but I heard the sound of paper rustling, then the sharp gasp as Jen opened the envelope. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. After a few long minutes reading in silence, she slowly set the documents on the coffee table in front of the couch. Well, Jen said carefully, the good news, Beverly, is that he's not filing for divorce. Bev, her smile flickered with a faint glimmer of hope, but Jen immediately held up her hand. But he is doing something much bigger. Much worse, actually. She hesitated, then said flatly, he's suing the company. Bob Adler. And the chairman of the board. I heard your daughter just finished her MBA at Wharton, I said, settling into my chair. He grinned wide, proud as ever. Yeah, she did. She's sharp, sharper than I ever was. I'm hoping she'll take the reins of Solomon Enterprises before too long. I've given her a 3-year plan. After that, Susan and I plan to disappear, sell the house, buy a boat, and just sail off into the sunset. That actually sounds incredible, I replied. You deserve it after all these years. He nodded, then looked at me knowingly. But I'm guessing this isn't just a friendly chat. I gave a small sigh. No, I suppose not. I figured, he said, his tone softening. Look, Beverly, I hate to be the one to say it, but the new supplier came in lower on price, faster on delivery, and still beat your specs for quality. It wasn't a close call. The numbers made the decision for me. She clenched her jaw. So, it's final then? You already signed the contracts. He gave a slow, regretful nod. Yeah. I couldn't pass it up. 3 days later, I was in my office when Susan stopped by. We made small talk for a while, covering the usual, market trends, client accounts, office gossip, before she slid in what seemed like a harmless question. Ever hear of a group called RGP? The name rang a bell. Yeah, I've come across them. They're a startup out of South Korea, right? Trying to break into the US market. That's the one, she said. I remembered them vividly, actually. I'd met the youngest son of the founder while stuck in an airport during a long delay. We started chatting, and once we figured out we were both in the same industry, he pulled out his laptop and walked me through some of their product lines. I was genuinely impressed. Clean design. Solid performance. They were still small, but they were hungry. It stuck with me. Later that night, I found myself thinking back, way back, to when Beverly and I had just started dating. She had been so full of energy and ambition, a vision of confidence with sharp edges and big dreams. I could still see her standing outside our old apartment building, holding her first official offer letter in her hands, eyes lit up with pride. When she earned that first big promotion, I took her out to celebrate at a place neither of us could really afford back then. She tried to protest, but I pulled out my first bonus check and told her she wasn't the only one who had earned something. That night, the celebration felt like a dream. It wasn't just dinner, it was us. The two of us believing we could take on the world together. And now here we were. She was already seated when I walked into the room. A woman in her early 50s with a firm voice and a no-nonsense air about her. She introduced herself professionally. My name is Janet Matthews. I'm a state-appointed arbitrator from the Employment Commission. I'll be overseeing this session. Now, just to be clear, while we might reach a preliminary understanding today, nothing will be binding until every term is properly documented and notarized. The room was quiet as she clicked a small recorder on the table and gestured for us to begin. Janet, the arbitrator, laid everything out with practiced clarity. If we can't reach an agreement today, she said, her voice even, or if either party chooses not to accept my recommendation, you're both within your rights to escalate this to the state capitol for further review. And if that still doesn't lead to resolution, it can proceed to civil court as a formal lawsuit. Then she turned her attention to the HR rep, a guy named Leonard, and thanked him for providing all the necessary documentation. He nodded and confirmed what Dave had already suspected. Once the current stock of products dropped below a certain level, The company had a plan to place a large-scale order with the new supplier. It had all been prearranged. They would unload the old inventory at a discounted rate, and the savings from switching vendors would more than make up the difference. On paper it was a smart move: efficiency, profit, optics. Everyone stood to gain, except Dave. Dave sat quietly through it all, then cleared his throat. "Yeah, I played a little golf. Took a few clients out for dinner. I wasn't slacking, I was building relationships. Talking numbers. Forecasting demand. The work didn't stop just because it didn't happen behind a desk. My direct manager knew exactly what I was doing and why." He paused, scanning the room. "And to be honest, if I hadn't stepped in to buffer things, Adler would have driven our biggest client away months ago." Across the table, Beverly was reeling. Her head was pounding, not just from the hangover but from the realization that she, as CEO, hadn't known any of this. Why hadn't she paid closer attention? Why had she tuned Dave out so often when he tried to tell her about his job? That quiet voice in the back of her mind had started speaking louder lately, especially after that night with the scotch. Half a bottle deep, she'd finally admitted to herself what she'd been refusing to face for years. She'd been dismissing Dave's role, belittling it, making it seem smaller than it truly was. And now she was seeing the full cost of that arrogance. Dave had burned bridges so methodically, so precisely, that it was like watching a demolition expert at work. And she couldn't even argue. Everything he'd done tied directly to their shared history, to the trust she'd broken, and the support she hadn't given. Her mind wandered briefly to something else that had been eating at her. The changes, cosmetic, yes, but deeply symbolic. The work she'd had done wasn't extreme, just subtle procedures. But they weren't temporary. And even though she told herself it was about maintaining that executive edge, looking 30 when you've already crossed into your mid-40s, she was starting to wonder who exactly she'd done it for. Meanwhile, her attorney had quietly approached her a few days prior with a chilling discovery. "Beverly," he'd said, handing over a slim folder, "you're not going to like this." Inside were records, notes, and correspondence. Turns out, Bob Adler had been in backroom talks with the leadership of the company they were in the middle of merging with. And those talks, they involved replacing Beverly. Entirely. The documents made the corporate position crystal clear. Remove the problem at the top, cleanly and without delay. The directive wasn't subtle: get rid of the cancer. And Beverly, after everything she had sacrificed, all the late nights, the boardroom battles, the wins she'd bled for, was the cancer. "I was handling the purchasing as well as sourcing materials," the man across from Beverly said, voice calm but resolute. "But things have shifted. And before you ask, yes, I did have a handshake deal with your former sales rep. But once he left your company, I no longer felt any obligation to honor that verbal agreement." She stiffened slightly but said nothing. "To be frank," he continued, "the South Korean supplier just offers more. The price point is better, sure, but the product itself is stronger. It exceeds the performance specs we originally agreed upon with your company. My procurement officer, coincidentally, knows the owner's son personally. Says he's reliable, sharp, and transparent. That kind of trust matters." Beverly felt the ground shift a little under her, but kept her composure. Meanwhile, several towns away, Dave was walking through a property that felt like a dream finally waking up. It wasn't extravagant, but it was his. Tucked away on the edge of a small hill with a wide wraparound porch and enough land behind it to do something meaningful. Maybe even grow that vegetable garden he'd always talked about. "This building," he said aloud, running his hand along the outer siding, "would be perfect for that workshop I've wanted for years." He looked out toward the field and nodded to himself. Space, air, purpose, it was all here. "I'm sorry, Bev," he whispered into the silence. "But after 8 years of standing in your shadow, I've finally come to love the light." Her voice echoed in his memory, fragile and unsure. "Where does that leave us?" It had been such a sad, broken question that he softened his tone when he responded. "I don't know," he told her gently. "I really don't. But I doubt we'll ever be husband and wife again. Not in the way we once were." He took a long breath before adding, "Respect is the foundation of any partnership. And I haven't felt respected, either as your man or as your colleague, for a long, long time." Back at the company headquarters, Beverly sat on a bench just outside the office complex, watching a few children chase each other around a fountain. There was a sadness on her face, but as she watched them play, something shifted. The corners of her lips turned upward. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't just a polite smile, it was genuine. She stood, brushing the wrinkles from her blazer. She knew where she needed to start. The first step on her journey forward? removing the people who had helped create the mess behind her. Bob Adler was at the top of that list. She tried, briefly, to summon some sort of compassion for him. But it wasn't there. He had lied to her, undermined Dave, and betrayed the company that had trusted him for years. Maybe she hadn't been as naive as he assumed, just vain enough to let his flattery blind her. That part stung the most. But his sins weren't going to be buried. Not anymore. Back at his new home, Dave was making progress. The porch had been freshly painted. He'd gone with a soft sage green, which popped beautifully against the dark cedar shutters. A neighbor had even stopped by and complimented the color choice. That meant something to him more than it should have. He had torn out the old carpet and revealed the original hardwood floors underneath, which he'd spent hours sanding and sealing himself. They gleamed now, rich with history. Outside, he'd installed ceiling fans above the porch swing and rockers, knowing the summers would be hot. But he wanted to sit there, watch the sun set, feel the breeze, and for once in his life, just breathe. Dave could have bought the house outright or close to it. Between the back pay he received after arbitration and what he'd tucked away in savings, he had enough for a sizable down payment. But it still would have left him with a 15-year mortgage, and that wasn't how he wanted to start this new chapter. So, he did something that surprised even himself. He let go of the house. At least that one. Instead, he found something a little smaller, a little older, but full of charm. The kind of place with real wood underfoot, creaking floorboards that told stories, and enough land out back to finally plant the vegetable garden he'd talked about for years but never had time for. Was it perfect? No. But it was his. Every nail, every board, every corner was peace. Does that mean I don't miss her? He asked himself one evening, kneeling in the dirt beside a fresh patch of tilled earth. No. Not at all. He still remembered the little things before the job titles and power suits changed who she was. The spontaneous weekend getaways they used to call sidey trips. Their playful code for sneaking off to make love in hotel beds and pretend they were strangers in a new city. The long conversations that started with world news and somehow ended in them dreaming about their future, wrapped in each other's arms. He hadn't forgotten any of that. But those memories were faded now, washed out like old Polaroids. The newer, sharper images in his mind were of her standing tall on a podium, full of pride and ego, buying into her own legend like an athlete who believed every word of the praise printed about her. "You're incredible at breaking down a problem," he'd told her once during a meeting. "And your determination? It used to inspire people. But right now, I don't think you want me back." She'd opened her mouth to speak, but he kept going. "And to be honest, someone who hesitates this much, who wavers like you do. That's not what leadership looks like." Those words landed hard. She didn't argue, didn't snap back. The only thing stopping her from exploding was the bitter truth behind his voice. Dave saw it, the flash of red creeping up her neck, the way her jaw tightened like it always did when she wanted to fight back but didn't have the ammunition. He gave her a small grin. "There she is. I knew you were still in there somewhere." Beverly spent the next few days obsessed. She tore through websites, buried herself in online forums and auction listings. She didn't care what it cost. She would spend every dime if it meant she could crawl her way back into Dave's life, even if only for a moment. Then, like fate stepping in, she got a message from a seller. It was the same car. The exact make and model Dave used to dream about restoring. The front was pristine, gleaming, polished, gorgeous. But the back was mangled, wrecked during a secret joyride by the seller's nephews. When he realized the cost of fixing it, he dragged it into a field and left it to rot. For 6 months, it had sat there, forgotten. But the interior? Immaculate. And that front end? It looked like it had rolled off the factory floor. Beverly was ready to write the check. Hope had crept in again. But then she saw something else, something that crushed her more than anything before. A photo. Dave was standing by the porch swing he'd installed himself, holding a small girl in one arm, maybe 3, maybe 4. Her little arms were wrapped around his neck, and she was peppering his face with kisses, giggling so hard she almost lost her balance. And Dave, he was beaming. A full, radiant, unguarded smile. Not just joy, pure happiness. And that's when it hit Beverly. She would never give him that. Not now. Not at their age. She had been so focused on building an empire, on being recognized and respected, that she never stopped to think about what she was sacrificing, or what she was asking Dave to live without. It crashed into her chest like a falling brick. The truth, unrelenting, "I've been so selfish." Her whole identity had been her career. That truth had finally settled in, cold and unmovable. Somewhere along the way, family stopped being a priority, not because she didn't want one, but because she convinced herself there would always be time for that later. Now, standing there watching him with that child, so natural, so loving, Beverly knew the harsh reality: there was no later left. What had been lost couldn't be rebuilt, not in the way she used to imagine. She closed her eyes and forced her thoughts to settle. If she had any hope of reaching him, of finding a sliver of the man who once looked at her like she was his entire world, she had to stay present. No unraveling. No rehearsed speeches. Just the moment, this moment. A flicker of something caught in her chest when she remembered what he'd called her earlier. On. It had been so long since he used her nickname she honestly couldn't remember the last time. She mentioned it to Susan later, her voice low, a little raw. Susan offered a small, hopeful smile. That's because he finally stopped bottling up everything he was feeling. That's a good sign, Beverly. It means he's not indifferent. Beverly gave a soft laugh, though it held no joy. I probably earned everything he said to me, but that doesn't make hearing it any easier. I came here to fix something, she added quietly. To try and rekindle what we had. If I tuck my tail and leave now, I'll never forgive myself. So whatever happens next, Susan, just let it happen. No interference. This isn't some office meeting. This is a heavyweight match and I've got to face it myself. It all started to unravel again at the table, during what was supposed to be a calm visit. A moment of casual conversation became something more pointed when Marcia, one of Dave's neighbors apparently, spoke up. How dare he share something so personal, Beverly muttered under her breath, cheeks burning. Before she could fully react, Dave stepped in. That's not exactly true, he said smoothly, voice calm but firm. Mara said she didn't want children of her own. That's different. Marcia blinked. Oh, so, Mara, why didn't you want kids? The air shifted. Beverly winced. Marcia, Dave said, tone edged with warning, you're out of line. You barely know her. That's not your question to ask. Mara looked down, suddenly flustered. You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep. Dave's important to me and sorry. The moment softened again when a little tug on Dave's pant leg pulled everyone's attention. It was the same little girl from before, cheeks flushed from her nap, one hand reaching up toward him. Without thinking, Dave scooped her up, balancing her easily on one arm. Pick, she said, pointing toward the garden where a flash of bright yellow caught her eye. Dave smiled and carried her over, then set her down gently. Beverly watched, her heart in her throat, as the girl toddled up to a tomato plant and carefully twisted a golden tomato free. She turned, beaming, and held it up toward Beverly. She wants you to wash it, Dave said, grinning. So she can have it on her sandwich. I've been teaching her not to eat anything until it's been cleaned. Beverly took the tomato with hands that trembled slightly. This was what she had missed. Not just the child, not just the home, but the rhythm of life she'd pushed aside in the pursuit of being someone. Now she wasn't sure who she'd become at all. I use organic pesticides, Mara was saying, gently plucking at a leaf in Dave's garden. You and Ari said you understand, right? Beverly stood quietly, still processing everything. Watching Mara, this young woman who had clearly been through more than most, show so much grace and resilience despite her broken edges, it took her breath away. Snapping out of her daze, Beverly stepped forward and wrapped Mara in another firm hug. There were no words for what she felt in that moment, only a quiet, unspoken connection between two women who had lived very different lives and still found common ground. She pulled a card from her purse and scribbled something quickly on the back. Here, she said softly. That's my private number. Keep it safe. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Day or night. Understand? Mara gave a small nod, eyes wide, as if unsure she even deserved the offer. Marcia, meanwhile, was crying again, quiet tears that seemed to come from somewhere deep. She alternated between hugging them both, and finally, when she'd composed herself, she turned and walked slowly away down the gravel path. Her steps were heavy, and Beverly watched her until she disappeared behind the trees. Dave wandered over to the porch swing, clearly deep in thought. Beverly followed and sat beside him. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was reflective. Tender even. I came here with so many expectations, she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. But I let go of those pretty quickly. I lost my way, Dave. Somewhere along the line I stopped seeing clearly. I forgot what really matters. She turned toward him, eyes filled with sincerity. I want to come back home. But I need help finding the road again. I need a guide. And I'm hoping it can be you. He didn't say anything, but his expression softened. I think seeing a counselor is a good place to start, she continued. Do you want to look for one or shall I? Either way, we'll both have to agree on who we see. And we have to be honest this time. Really honest. Her voice cracked then and she cried quietly into his shoulder. For a while he held her and said nothing. Then gently she pulled away, wiping her tears. One of our first steps should be rebuilding the intimacy we lost, she said carefully. Not just physically. I know it's too soon to share a bed again, but I'd like to start somewhere. Can I just sleep in the same room? Dave looked at her for a long moment, heart pulled in two directions. But before he could answer, Ari's tiny voice came from down the hall. I don't want cereal, she mumbled sleepily, rubbing her eyes. She doesn't need cereal, Dave chuckled softly. She needs a real breakfast. He stood and called down the hall. Give us a minute to get dressed, kiddo. We'll come down and fix something good. Or take you somewhere if that's easier. Ari's only response was a big nod as she scooped up her doll and began toddling off. Come on, Ari, Mara said, lifting her. Let's get you some juice while Mr. Dave and Miss Beverly get ready. As soon as the door clicked shut behind them, Beverly turned to Dave, her eyes blazing with frustrated longing. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she said in a low voice. I was really hoping we could have a little overdue closeness. But I can wait. I really can. She stopped herself and gave a sheepish smile. You know what? I'll leave it to you girls to decorate that space however you want. Dave looked toward Mara with quiet seriousness. Do you understand what we're offering you? She looked stunned for a moment, like she couldn't quite believe it was real, then flew into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. He held her tight. Beverly, having just laid Ari down gently on the couch where she had fallen asleep, stepped into the embrace and wrapped her arms around them both. For the first time in a long time, it felt like something whole was beginning again, not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. Dave left the kitchen a few minutes later, letting the sounds of laughter and morning routine fade behind him. He made his way into the living room and sank into his favorite recliner, the big, overstuffed one that still molded to his shape after all these years. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process just how wildly his life had changed in less than a day. This time yesterday he was a man alone. Now things felt different. Tentative but full of promise. A few minutes passed and to his surprise Beverly came down the stairs. Without saying a word, she walked over and climbed onto the oversized recliner with him, curling up close like she used to when they were first married. Once she got comfortable, she let out a soft sigh. I stayed in that house long enough, baby, she said, her voice gentle. That's why we're selling it. I never want to spend another night there again. Cold marble floors and polished mirrors can't keep you warm. And I've realized, I love being warm. Dave didn't say anything. He just nodded, letting her words settle between them like a blanket. Later that afternoon they returned from running errands. Beverly's car was crammed with bags, groceries, supplies, a few toys for Ari, and as Dave stepped out onto the porch, Ari was already nestled comfortably in his arms. Why didn't you just take your truck? He asked Beverly, raising an eyebrow. She gave him a playful slap on the arm and smirked. Now you bring that up? We'll use it next time. For now, just think about what you want for dinner while we unpack. Dave did more than think about it, he took over the kitchen. He chopped up some chicken breasts, tossed them with sliced zucchini, carrots, and 2 kinds of bell peppers, yellow and red. A splash of soy sauce, a hint of ginger, and just like that, he had a stir-fry sizzling in the pan. Simple but colorful and flavorful. He caught Beverly's eye while cooking, and from the look she gave him, he knew he'd impressed her. After dinner, as they got ready for the day ahead, they snuck in a few playful moments in the bathroom, teasing, laughing, touching, but they didn't let it go too far. There just wasn't enough time. Still, it was the kind of closeness that hadn't existed between them in years. It was something. Mara had breakfast ready by the time they were dressed. They sat down together like any ordinary suburban family, passing syrup and napkins across the table. Ari, ever the affectionate one, demanded kisses before anyone could leave. She gave Dave a smacking kiss on the cheek, then turned and kissed Beverly just as earnestly. Then, not wanting to leave anyone out, she gave Marcia a kiss too. They all laughed, but there was something grounding in it, something real. Since Marcia had recently gotten her driver's license, she offered to drop Dave off so they wouldn't have to juggle the car seat. She drove Beverly's car while Beverly took Dave's truck and headed off to work. Later that morning, Jen burst into Beverly's office with wide eyes and flushed cheeks. You did it, she said breathlessly. You really did it. Beverly stood calmly, smoothing out her blouse. It just so happens, she said with a smile, that I'll be needing a personal assistant in about 3 months. But it comes with strings. Jen blinked. You'll need at least a 2-year degree, Beverly said. So you'll be enrolling in night classes. If you fail, or stop going, you lose the position. No exceptions. Jen's eyes welled up. You really think I can do this? I know you can, Beverly replied. But don't let us down, honey. We're counting on you. That night, after all the chaos had settled, Beverly and Dave finally crawled into bed. It was quiet, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead and the occasional rustle of the sheets. As soon as Beverly slid under the covers, Dave turned toward her and kissed her, firmly, deliberately. She blinked, surprised. Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for? Dave brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. That's for what you did today. For Marcia. For Ari. For Jen. She didn't respond right away, she just smiled, deeply, genuinely. Then she rolled over and turned off the light. We can talk about that in a couple of months, Dave said, arms folded behind his head as they lay in bed. Once Marcia's settled into her new job and things feel more stable. Beverly nodded thoughtfully. What kind of car do you think we should get her? Dave smiled. Let's wait. Give her a voice in it. After a couple of months, we'll sit down with her and get her input. No sports cars though, nothing flashy, nothing that'll break the bank. Beverly chuckled. Agreed. It doesn't need to turn heads, just get her from point A to point B without us worrying every time it's parked in a grocery store lot. Exactly. Something safe, dependable. And that's your assignment, honey, he said, turning toward her with a grin. I trust you to handle that. She kissed him on the cheek. All right. But for now, let's get some sleep. The next morning, they woke to the gentle stirrings of their personal little alarm clock. Ari padding down the hallway with sleepy feet and a stuffed bear tucked under one arm. Both Beverly and Dave smiled without saying a word. No blaring beeps, no buzzing phones. Just a soft giggle and a warm bed. Beverly looked at Dave, her heart full. You know, when people at work give me strange looks, whisper behind my back, maybe I shouldn't correct them. Let them assume what they want. Maybe they'll treat me better. Dave raised an eyebrow. Could be worse things to be called, he said with a smirk. And I've been called most of them. That evening, they returned home to find dinner already underway. Dave, with Ari tucked comfortably on his hip, had the grill going and the table half set. Her little hands were wrapped tightly around his neck, and he didn't seem in any rush to let go. He called Susan as soon as they walked in, letting her know everything had gone smoothly. Meanwhile, Ari was bubbling with excitement, trying to explain, with all the urgency of a toddler, that she had friends now and a teacher named Miss Rose, and that school was the best thing ever. Dave leaned over and kissed Beverly lightly. Then he turned to Marcia, who was lingering near the doorway looking a little adrift. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, then kissed her cheek. Go get changed, girls. Ari and I made dinner and it'll be ready in 10. As the women went upstairs, Ari skipped behind them, singing and laughing, trying to grab both their hands at once. Her joy was infectious. 10 minutes later they returned, all changed into shorts and t-shirts. Even Ari proudly wearing a shirt that was a little too big but full of color. The picnic table outside had been set simply but lovingly, grilled chicken, vegetables, sweet tea and lemonade poured into mason jars. They ate together under the golden light of evening, laughing like old friends who had found each other again. Somewhere down the road there was a retired judge, now in private practice, who had agreed to take their case. She didn't take many. 3 clients at most and only the one she believed in. She had already read their file. And she was intrigued. She didn't take many cases but she chose to represent them. Judge Catherine Rowe was semi-retired, taking only 3 clients at a time, and only the one she felt a connection with. Fortunately, she found something admirable in Dave and Beverly's commitment, not just to each other but to building something new, something stronger. She was likable in a quiet, confident way. Ari adored her almost instantly and loved sitting on her lap, playing with her long silver hair like it was a magical rope. But beneath that soft exterior, Judge Rowe was steel. When it came time to speak about the custody arrangements, she made it clear. In one way this is straightforward. Legally, giving custody of the minor to her sister is the logical choice. She's in a stable home. She holds a reliable job. The child's thriving. The environment is nurturing. I see no barriers. Neither Dave nor Beverly ever imagined they'd end up here, part legal hearing, part new beginning, but it felt right. Dave came home that evening, still dressed in his work shirt, and scooped up both Beverly and Ari, planting a kiss on each of them so big it made Ari giggle uncontrollably. I never thought I'd see the day, he said, smiling with disbelief. You might think that marriage counseling was an easy road from there. That they just had a few sessions and came out polished and renewed. But it wasn't like that. Their counselor, Dr. Lane, was sharp. She didn't let them gloss over anything. In individual sessions, she made each of them explain why their marriage had fallen apart, and why they wanted it back. They had moments of shouting, of saying things neither wanted to admit, and other moments of sobbing into each other's arms like they were afraid the world might pull them apart again. There were sessions where they barely made eye contact, and others where they left holding hands like nothing had ever broken. It wasn't easy, but it was real. 14 months later, in the garden of the Episcopal church they'd been attending, Dave stood at the altar. The bower was laced with late summer blooms. Their friends from the age-appropriate fellowship group they joined filled the wooden pews in the garden. Even JY had flown in from Chicago, her husband and their 5-month-old baby in tow. Sol stood beside Dave, calm and beaming. On the other side, Susan stood next to Marcia, who wore a gentle smile and a soft blue dress that matched her spirit. Ari, now 6 years old, held a basket of petals, standing proudly between their two boxers, Sunny and Sugar. Each dog wore a tiny pillow strapped to its back, looking positively noble. And then Beverly stepped into view, her arm wrapped around a young girl they now called family. Professionally, Beverly had brokered one of the most successful mergers her firm had ever seen. The chairman himself flew down to meet her and try to convince her to take on another role, more money, more prestige, a corner office in Manhattan. But she politely declined. "I'm entering a new phase of life," she said, smiling faintly. "One I want to savor. My youngest just turned 11, and my middle daughter is getting ready to start high school. I've missed enough already. I don't intend to miss any more." They sat in her office surrounded by portraits, Ari's artwork. One painting, a green dragon with fiery red spine tips. Another, a yellow dinosaur with blue polka dots. The chairman had commented on them. "I keep those up for a reason," Beverly said. "Anytime I feel overwhelmed or just tired, I look at them. They remind me who I do this for. Who I am now." When the baby was finally placed in their arms, an infant born to a family friend who couldn't raise her, the tears came freely. Dave, Beverly, Ari, and everyone else who had loved this little girl long before she arrived cried without shame. Ari was especially attached. Over time, everyone noticed the bond growing stronger between her and the baby they named Haley. Ari, who was still so small herself, would sit next to her crib and hum lullabies she made up on the spot. She called her "my sunshine." To the outside world it looked seamless. So seamless, in fact, that most people just assumed they had always been a family. And in the ways that mattered, they had been.